When Hunter got to the end of the shortcut, Jack was there. Jack made sure he kept Hunter between himself and the horse. He had reservations about whether Hunter could control it or not. Hunter introduced Jack to his mate, Moxy the horse, who he would have many adventures with. Jack was quite pleased to be heading off to his house. Horses weren't meant to be that big, sort of like a war horse from mythology. Hunter carried on home to his house. The principal's car was in the driveway when he got there. Hunter had almost forgotten about that. Oh well, he thought, I'd better go in and face the music. He led Moxy down the side of the house to put him out the paddock, out behind the back of the house, little house paddock. The principal was sitting in Smith's study explaining why Hunter wouldn't be allowed back to school, and Smith had decided that the principal was a dreadful bore who just liked to go on a lot. Smith let out an explanation when he saw Hunter leading the horse up the driveway. The horse's head was as high as the window. Smith opened it and said, "Where the heck did you get that from? Deal with that beast and get inside and make it snappy." The principal, quick to condemn and trying to be friendly at the same time, said to Smith, "That's just the sort of irresponsible thing I mean." Smith, not giving anything away in his expression, just replied, "What? You never seen a young fellow with a horse before?" The principal was flabbergasted and knew not what to say. Hunter put the horse into the paddock, and on his way through the house to the study, yelled out to his mum to go and have a look in the back paddock. Hunter sat down in the study, not sure what to expect. Smith read from a sheet of paper, almost like a set of charges in a courtroom, that the principal had given him and a few notes he'd taken. And Hunter said that was pretty much what happened. Smith looked at the principal and asked him, "So he's expelled for the rest of the year?" The principal replied, "At least, and probably for the next as well." Now, the year wasn't that far from being over, and Hunter was pretty sure he probably wouldn't be back for the next year anyway, so he wasn't too fussed about that. Smith looked at Hunter and said to him it looked like his school days were over, and excused him from the room, but to make sure he was back in his study by 7 the next morning. The principal left at the same time. Smith then went outside to see the latest stray that Hunter had brought home. Moxy was busy eating an apple from Smith's wife's hand. Hunter had a bit of a collection of animals. There was a small fox terrier called Tag. The dog thought he was 10 foot tall and ran yapping at Moxy, trying to be the boss. Moxy snorted at the dog, and it gave up. There was a hawk Hunter had found that had hit a truck. He'd nursed it back to health, and it now lived out the back paddock. There were a couple of cats he'd found in a drain pipe, and a rabbit who lived under the woodshed. The rabbit wasn't averse to kicking the dog if it strayed too close. The cat stayed away. Hunter had a powerful air rifle and usually brought rabbits home that Mrs. Joe Gunter made into a delicious stew. He'd found Thunder the rabbit after a storm had probably washed it out of its warren. He'd been very small and weak, and it had been doubtful whether he would survive, but within a week he was hopping around the kitchen, lying in front of the wood fire and being right at home. Now even Thunder the rabbit hopped over the fence to see Moxy. Hopped over to the fence. He couldn't hop right over an actual fence, but go through the wires. Hunter's mum said, "He sure ain't pretty, but that's a lot of horse." It was fairly quiet around the Gunter dinner table that night. His younger sister whispered to him he was in big trouble because the principal had been around. The next morning, Hunter was in Smith's study at 7 sharp. Smith was up and ready for the day. There was a coffee machine in his study, and he was making a brew. Once there were 2 cups of coffee, Smith sat down with Hunter. The coffee sure did smell and taste good. "Well," said Smith, "if you're not going to be at school, you need to be at work." Smith knew that Hunter already had a quite successful small part-time business, his rat catcher business. Where other kids had jobs at the supermarket or delivered papers, Hunter caught rats. The organic chicken farm up the road had a rat problem, and Hunter had solved it. They didn't want any poisons used, so Hunter trapped the rats, and now they were manageable. Twice a week he checked all the traps and reset them. Down at Glasgow's shipyard there had been a problem with big water rats. Glasgow hated rats. He'd had the pest people in and they'd poisoned them. The rats killed by the poison seemed to crawl into a space that was inaccessible and die there, then stink in the most unimaginable, stinky, horrible way. Some of his staff had even threatened to leave unless the stink was gone. Glasgow had rebuilt the engine on the chicken farmer's launch, who had told him about Hunter, so Glasgow had phoned him. Hunter trapped most of the rats plaguing the shipyard. At the moment he was using cut-in-half 2-litre milk containers with a powerful spring rat trap that was inside the containers, and he put a paste on it that he'd mixed up that the rats found irresistible. So when they went into the trap, they had to climb over the bar, and they pretty well got them every time. Smith spent the morning showing Hunter how to set up his business properly. After lunch they had a chat. Smith warned Hunter about Kaysen. Shady, 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 he said. The principal had agreed that Hunter could sit the state exams at the end of the year, which, like we say, wasn't too far away. And another thing, BP was going to take Hunter on for about 6 months or so to teach Hunter a few things. 6 months is long enough, Smith said. You don't want to be a wage slave. And there was another thing. Hunter's older brother and wife were coming back to live at the homestead for a while. Smith asked Hunter to move out to the stable. There was a loft that ran down one side with a couple of rooms, a little kitchenette, an outdoor shower, cold water only, and a long drop toilet. Hunter's older brother was at university following in Smith's footsteps, learning music. Hunter had tried some music lessons, but he just didn't seem to have the passion for playing. He liked listening. Smith remembered how his career had started out. He'd been 14, money was tight, so he'd finished school and started out in a fruit and veg market, cleaning and lugging stuff around, but his passion had been music. He busked and played and studied until he didn't have to work in the market anymore, but that is another story. Smith had started his family quite late in life, but he didn't have a problem with that. He remembered back to when Hunter had first shown his gift. Smith knew his own gifting, and that was music. Hunter? Well, he was definitely a hunter. It was a small dog that they owned, a bit of a mixed breed. Mrs. Joe Gunter had rescued it from an untimely death with an uncaring owner. And this little dog had an uncanny ability to find tennis balls. Pick one up and throw it into the thickest thicket you could find, and the little dog would go in and come out with it. Hunter must have been about 5 or 6 years old, and some guests had been over playing tennis and having a barbecue, having a nice 250-acre farm. There's plenty of room to put in a tennis court. One of those friendly games, but had taken more seriously than Wimbledon itself, was occurring, and the children were throwing balls for the dog when one of the children picked up the tennis champ's winning ball and threw it into a thick clump of bamboo, and the dogs just couldn't find it. Hunter wiggled into the clump and came back out with it. If somebody misplaced or lost something, he could usually find it. Once his mum from her kitchen window had watched him stalk a bird, and to her surprise he caught it before it could take off. She told him it was wild and he couldn't keep it. The bird was surprisingly calm and just flew away. Smith knew what to do. It was time to call in a favour, Black Pete, because his name was Pete and he had the blackest beard you'd ever seen. Although these days there were some streaks of white appearing. Smith taught Black Pete's daughter piano. The child was highly talented. Normally Smith charged an arm and both legs for his music lessons, to his wealthy clients anyway. However, he had a number of pupils, less well off than the very wealthy. Smith's only requirement when he taught these students was that the child had some talent and really wanted to learn. Black Pete had said if he could ever help, not to hesitate, so Smith didn't and made a call to BP. That was his nickname. As a result, BP would be there the next morning. Smith had a couple more things to say. When Hunter got his first paycheck to pay his mum some board, the second he handed to him was a bill for the ruined desk at the school. "Sort it, will you?" said Smith. Hunter had butterflies in his stomach going into the school office, but there were no worries. The secretary took $250 off Hunter and gave him a receipt. Hunter's finances were taking a bit of a hit. He'd decided that he wasn't going to wait for the first paycheck, and he just paid it out of some of his earnings from the rat-catching business. At 6 o'clock the next morning, BP turned up at the Joe Gunter's place, his old ute rattling away. However, if you saw how he used it and where it went, you would understand why he didn't have a new one. Smith opened the kitchen door and let BP in. BP went through and woke Hunter up. Perhaps tipped him out would be more accurate. Still half asleep, Hunter dressed and came downstairs. His mum had a big breakfast on the table. Smith and Big BP had big cups of coffee. They all polished off the breakfast, while Smith explained that BP had agreed to take Hunter on for about 6 months or so, and teach him some of the tricks of the trade, so to speak. BP was a trapper, a hunter. He could make or fix just about anything, and he was a rural contractor. Hunter readily agreed, especially as BP was a bit of a legend around town. They said it was a lion that had made the scars across his ribs and back. Before they left in his old ute, BP and Hunter went to the paddock where Moxy was. The horse came over and ate some hay from Hunter's hand. He had an apple for him also. Crunch, crunch, and it was gone. BP told Hunter that he sure did have some horse there. Hunter said his name was Moxy because he was so big, like the giant trucks moving earth down by the river. BP took Hunter to a job he needed to finish. It was a steep fence line for a farmer. Hunter worked willingly and listened to what Pete told him. Pete told him all about spacing out posts, digging holes, tensioning wires, the right angles for strainer post supports, and other fencing secrets. At lunchtime they'd finished and really hadn't been too much more to do. BP had been working there every day for the last month. After lunch, BP took Hunter to a trap line he was working. The trap line was at a reasonably famous rose garden, but possums had been getting in and causing havoc. BP was removing them. As they went around the traps, 4 of the 20 traps had dead possums in them. The traps had a small slot that the possum put its head in, looking for food, and a bar came down, breaking its neck. BP showed Hunter how to skin the possums. Hunter couldn't believe how quickly BP could skin a possum. It was a bit messy and smelly, but Hunter didn't mind. BP dropped Hunter off back in town, down at the waterfront, with enough time for him to clear his rat traps at the shipyard. Hunter had been experimenting with some new food mixes to find out just which one the rats liked the best, just exactly what they couldn't resist, but nothing beat the paste he already had. Most of the traps were clear. Hunter had pretty much cleared out the traps at Glasgown's yard. However, he had negotiated a retainer to keep it that way, and as long as any rats were caught and there were none to be seen, Glasgown was happy to pay. It was late when Hunter went to Glasgown's office to collect his payment. Glasgown hated rats, really hated them. One had bitten his toe when he was little, just about took the whole toe off. He was most impressed with what young Hunter achieved in removing the big water rats. "Those bloomin' huge water rats will have a go at you given half a chance," Glasgown had told his neighbours down on the waterfront. Max of Max's boats had lost a sail when 2 monster water rats wandered past while an older couple were just about to sign the document for a gin palace. The woman had screamed and the man didn't seem too happy either. Max threw a glass at the rats, which they dodged before they vanished into the growth. The harbour board, who were on the other side of Glasgow's shipyards, had tried the same rat poisoning system that Glasgow had, the same poison baits everywhere. For a while it seemed to work, but the rats that were poisoned crawled into those inaccessible spaces and rotted and stunk like they did at Glasgow's, almost making some of the port work areas uninhabitable. After a while, the baits didn't even seem to bother the rats anymore. Some of them almost seemed to relish them. Max and the port company had agreed with Glasgow to give Hunter's rat-catching company a go. Glasgow told Hunter this as he paid him for this week's rat-catching. He gave Hunter the contact deals of who he needed to speak to. As he'd gone up to Glasgow's office, he'd seen Jack. Jack worked at the shipyards after school, cleaning up and sweeping or anything else he was asked to do. Hunter could see that Jack had a black eye. Jack was waiting at the gates of the shipyard and Hunter met him there. Jack was incredibly excited. He told Hunter what had happened. Glasgow had offered Jack an apprenticeship, not out of sentiment or feeling sorry for him or anything, but because Jack had worked hard 3 nights a week after school for 2 years, sweeping, cleaning, doing small jobs, never complaining or shirking, on time, and asking the tradesmen lots of annoying questions. Glasgow had asked Jack lots of questions and was satisfied that Jack would succeed. As a result, Jack was now signed up for an apprenticeship with the Glasgow shipyards. He was going to start in 1 week. Glasgow's shipyards apprenticeships were unusual in that they didn't follow the national curriculum. Glasgow did the apprenticeship entirely in-house. The tradesmen, however, were highly sought after all around the country if they ever left the shipyards. Jack's dad, he was an accountant of no great note. He was violent. He was a drunk accountant. When Jack told him about the apprenticeship, he received a tirade about what a waste of life he was and how useless this trade was and how lowly a position it was. Then he thumped him again. Jack determined there and then that he wasn't going to take any more of this and he was going to leave home. BP turned up early the next morning and Hunter was ready to go this time. BP took Hunter back to his place. He was teaching Hunter about guns today. By the end of the day, Hunter had learned how to disassemble, inspect and clean a rifle. BP was really big on firearm safety and Hunter was having it drilled into him. Safety, safety, safety. Hunter had quite a lot more respect for his air rifle after this. The next morning BP turned up a bit later. Hunter was ready to go. BP took Hunter around to the back of the house. BP said it was time to break the horse in. Moxy came over to the fence where Hunter and BP were. Moxy loved apples. Hunter gave him one, crunch crunch as normal, and it was gone. BP was once again amazed at just how big the horse was. BP had a sack of sand with straps on it, which Moxy let him put on his back. Hunter could have sworn that Moxy had a look in his eye that said, "What on earth are you doing?" Moxy snorted, lay down, kicked his legs in the air, rolled around, then stood up and came back to the fence looking for another apple. BP had an old saddle that they fitted up. He told Hunter he'd got it for a song years ago because it was so big that no one else bid on it at a clearance auction. Hunter was very pleased to get the saddle. BP said he could have it for what he bought it for. Moxy was happy for Hunter to pull himself up and onto the saddle and then took him for a trot around the back paddock. When BP hopped on, Moxy just stood there to start with, then did a little hop, if a monster horse can do a little hop, and kicked out his legs a bit. BP held on for dear life, thinking the giant horse was about to bolt. However, Moxy then trotted around like a show pony, snorting as he went. BP was quite happy to slide off. He told Hunter that Moxy looked like one of those battle horses in an old painting. "Well, that didn't go like I expected," BP said. "Yeah," replied Hunter. "It was almost like he already knew about saddles and things." BP took Hunter shooting for the rest of the day, shooting various targets and showing Hunter just what a bullet was capable of. Hunter began to realise just how much power a rifle had and how much respect it needed, so the situation where someone could get hurt or killed didn't occur. Hunter now knew why it was safety, safety, safety. BP told Hunter to be at the gate extra early the next morning, 5 a.m. Nasty job to do, he told Hunter, and he'd better bring an overnight bag. Hunter Joe Gunter went to sleep, wondering what a nasty job may be, and it was late before he fell asleep. Hunter was waiting at the gate. BP was 5 minutes late. BP wanted to know how Moxy was. Hunter had fed him a bucket of oats and Moxy was fine. BP was glad that young Hunter Joe Gunter had been up that extra bit early to look after his horse. On the rack inside the ute, Hunter could see BP's rifle, his long-shot one. It was a .303 Lee Enfield sniper version with aperture sights. The one BP was very fussy about not getting it bumped. He told Hunter he could hit a dinner plate at 600 metres every time. The drive was about 4 hours away, and Hunter dozed in between BP telling him what the job was. They were heading out to a big sheep station. The owner was an old buddy of BP's. The station owner was having problems with stock losses. His sheep were being killed by a dog. BP had been out to the station tracking the dog before, but hadn't been able to sight it. However, he'd seen enough of its patterns and signs of its movements to make a pretty informed guesstimate of where it might pop up and where it might go. This morning he was hoping to get in position to shoot it. Hunter didn't feel too happy about shooting a dog. He liked dogs. They arrived at the station, not the farmhouse, but a paddock way out the back where the bush met the pasture. Quiet, real quiet. Step in my footsteps and do what I do, said BP. So Hunter was quiet, real quiet, and followed in BP's every footstep. After an hour or so of skirting the bush line, they came to a small hollow under the shade of some large tea trees. They settled into the hollow with the whole of the paddock below them. They were almost invisible. There were sheep far below them, dotted all about. They spent the whole day there surveilling the paddock way below them. Occasionally BP would use a pair of binoculars. He handed them to Hunter at one stage to have a good look. Any movements BP made were slow and steady. Hunter copied him. They took sips of water from small water bottles they had both carried in. Hunter needed to go for a pee. He signalled to BP his discomfort. BP pointed to the scrub behind, and Hunter crawled there and had a pee on his knees. BP went later and put a handful of dirt over the pee stop, but even though they were well downwind, Hunter felt every bump in the ground after a couple of hours. It was so uncomfortable. Not a word was spoken. BP looked pretty comfortable though, even though the ground was rough and almost looked like he could have a snooze, but his eyes were wide open and he was alert, totally alert. The heat of the day shimmered and the sheep moved around grazing and laying in the shade of various trees. Birds came and went. Hunter saw a rabbit pop out from its warren. The day passed by with all of the paddock's activities observed by BP and Hunter. None of the insects or the animals were aware of their presence. They were being so still and quiet it was almost like they weren't even breathing. The shadows began to get longer and the sun was heading for the horizon. There was a gully about 300 metres away with trees and a small stream that led from the bush into the paddock. Hunter felt a slow tap on his back and looked to where BP pointed, the end of the gully. At first Hunter could see nothing. Then there was a movement, a dog, looking, sniffing, testing the air, suddenly in the open. The dog moved fast and was among the sheep, savaging two of them. The dog paused for a moment, lifting its nose, almost testing the wind, downwind. BP fired. The dog collapsed on the spot. The rifle shot echoed around the valley. "Got it," said BP. "Bloomin' shame, really. Somebody's dog may be abandoned." The farmer had been trying to get for the dog for weeks and had lost over 70 sheep to it. They got to the dog, shot right through the head with a big mess where the bullet had come out. The dog had an old faded collar but no tags. They had to put the 2 sheep down. They were standing there with their intestines hanging out in shock. BP quickly dressed them out and Hunter helped them. "No point in waste," BP said. It was dark when they were done. BP had 2 LED headlamps in his small backpack which they put on and turned on. Quite amazing the light from such small torches, Hunter thought. BP slung the rifle on one shoulder and the dog over the other. Hunter had to carry the sheep carcasses. They didn't have to be quiet on the way back to the ute or go slow and careful. Once there, they put the bodies on the back of the ute and drove to the farmhouse. Though it was late, there was still a light on. The farmer came out and was very happy to see that they'd got the dog. He put it in a freezer to get it checked for a microchip in the next couple of days. The farmer's wife came out and invited them in. There were hot showers and a bed each for the night. Once they had showered, they came back to the kitchen. There was a large bowl of stew with farmhouse homemade bread. Hunter demolished his and had seconds. BP and the farmer were deep in conversation. It turned out that when they were young men, they had both gone prospecting and done quite well. The farmer had bought his farm. BP, it turned out, had bought a boat and embarked on adventures around the world before being shipwrecked on a remote reef in the Pacific, and eventually made his way on a jury-rigged raft from wreckage to an inhabited atoll. They were both sipping slowly from a whiskey bottle. Hunter tried a small shot. It was fiery and burning. He declined any more. The whiskey seemed to have no effect on the two of them, though the tales they were telling did seem to grow longer and longer. The farmer was saying how he wished they'd gone down the hole to look for gold. BP agreed, but remembered how dangerous it had seemed, and then done pretty well cleaning out the stream above it. Eventually Hunter fell asleep on the couch until dawn came. The farmer's wife cooked up another huge feed of bacon, mushrooms, eggs, tomatoes, homemade bread, more of the homemade bread and homemade sausages. Then BP and Hunter were on their way. Neither BP nor the farmer seemed the worse for wear from their late night. When they got back to town, Hunter cleaned and oiled the rifle before BP dropped them off back home. It was the weekend for the next couple of days, and BP told Hunter he'd see him bright and early Monday.